A single stone holds a silent epic of human ambition. Its incredible journey from a dark quarry to a sunlit cathedral spire was carved by countless hands. We will trace the path of medieval building stone to uncover the human stories etched into its surface. By the end, you will understand how to read the secret language carved into these monuments, revealing the lives of the people who built them. How did a quarryman's rough mark ensure he got paid? Why did carvers hide comic figures amidst solemn saints? This narrative exposes the very fabric of medieval society, its faith, its labor, and a legacy that still whispers to us today. What forgotten story would you hope to find written in stone? Deep beneath the rolling hills and quiet fields, our stone lay in a darkness older than kings. It was born not in fire, but in a slow, crushing patience, a compression of ancient seabeds and mineral-rich mud over countless millions of years. This geological cradle was the silent, non-negotiable first chapter for every medieval builder. They were not just looking for rock, they were searching for a partner in their ambition, a material with the right character for the task. The ideal stone had to possess a rare trinity of qualities. It needed immense durability to withstand centuries of weather, a certain workability so that a mason's chisel could shape it with relative precision, and often a pleasing color that would catch the light in a specific, glorious way. This is why they journeyed to particular places, to the fine-grained limestone quarries of Caen in France, a stone so pure and consistent it could be carved into the most delicate tracery, or to the rugged granite pits of Cornwall, whose stubborn strength was perfect for foundations and fortress walls. But finding the perfect stone was only half the battle. Its location was everything. Transporting stone was a logistical nightmare and a crushing financial burden, often costing more than the quarrying itself. A single large block might require a team of oxen and a specially reinforced cart, moving at a snail's pace over treacherous roads. This economic reality dictated the very map of medieval architecture. It is no accident that the great Cathedral of Canterbury is surrounded by the Kentish ragstone quarries that supplied it, or that the distinctive honey-colored buildings of Bath are made from the limestone dug from the hills nearby. The quarry was the true starting point, and the first critical decision made by a master builder was which bed of stone to unlock. This choice, etched into the earth itself, would determine the structural integrity, the aesthetic soul, and the very longevity of a monument meant to stand for the ages. And the act of extraction, of waking that sleeping stone, was a feat of raw human force meeting ancient geological wisdom. The quarryman's world was one of constant vibration and noise. Imagine the sharp, rhythmic ring of iron against stone echoing across a vast man-made canyon. His day began before dawn and ended long after sunset, his lungs filled with a fine, white dust that never seemed to settle. His most dramatic tool was fire. The technique was called fire setting. Workers would build a fierce blaze directly against the rock face, heating the stone for hours until it glowed with trapped energy. Then, with a great hiss and cloud of steam, they would douse it with water. The sudden thermal shock sent hairline fractures racing through the bedrock, a controlled violence that weakened the stone just enough for the next stage. Then came the drills. These were not delicate instruments, but heavy iron points, sometimes called chisels or punches, driven into the pre-weakened rock by the relentless swing of great hammers. The quarryman was not just a brute force laborer, he was a geologist without a degree. His most crucial skill was reading the stone's natural cleavage planes, the hidden lines of weakness where it would most willingly split. A misjudgment here could shatter a valuable block into useless rubble, or worse, cause a deadly rockfall. This was a trade passed from father to son, a language of the earth learned through calloused hands and a keen eye. The quarry itself was a self-contained society, often operating under its own set of laws and customs, separate from the town nearby. There was a clear hierarchy, from the unskilled laborers who moved the debris to the master quarrymen who could command the rock to yield perfect, squared blocks. Their work was the absolute foundation of everything that followed. Each block they pried loose was a blank slate, a rough, heavy promise of what was to come. And once freed, that stone faced its next great trial, a journey over land and water that would test the limits of medieval engineering. That echoing ring of iron was often followed by a more precise, rhythmic tapping. This was the sound of the wedge and feather, a deceptively simple tool that gave quarrymen god-like control over the stone. The process was a masterpiece of applied physics. First, the quarryman would drill a line of holes along the stone's natural grain, the path where he knew it wanted to break. Into each hole, he placed two half-round metal strips, the feathers, which acted as guides and protectors. Then he dropped a flat iron wedge between them. The real magic began when he and his team started tapping each wedge along the line, not with brute force, but with a steady, alternating rhythm. With every light strike, the wedges drove the feathers outward, pushing against the walls of the holes with a force that built exponentially. You could hear the stone begin to groan, a deep, low-pitched creak as microscopic cracks spread and connected between the holes. Then, with a final, sharp crack, the entire block would surrender, splitting apart along a line as straight as if it had been drawn by a ruler. This was not destruction, it was liberation. The wedge and feather allowed for the creation of blocks with remarkably flat, clean faces. This precision was a huge economic advantage, saving weeks of labor for the stone carvers who would later shape them at the building site. A block that emerged cleanly from the quarry needed only fine dressing, not the back-breaking work of hewing it down from a rough, irregular mass. That rhythmic tapping was in essence the first act of carving. It was the moment the chaotic rock of the earth was disciplined into geometry, given its first intentional shape by human hands, and once shaped, these heavy, silent passengers were ready for a journey that would test the ingenuity of an entire era. Those simple chiseled symbols, known as banker marks, transformed anonymous stone into a personal ledger. Think of them as a medieval worker's time card, carved directly into the material of his labor. A stonecutter would be assigned a unique mark, a simple glyph that was his and his alone. It could be a single straight line, a small triangle, a set of intersecting curves, or something resembling a crude arrow or letter. When he finished shaping a block, squaring its sides and smoothing its faces to the required standard, he would strike his personal symbol onto it with a single, confident blow of his chisel. This mark was not art, it was accountability. At the end of a long week or a hard season, the clerk of the works would walk through the quarry yard or the stone yard at the cathedral site, counting the finished blocks. He was not counting the men, he was counting their marks. Payment was made per stone, and only for stones that passed inspection. A poorly cut block, or one that did not meet the precise dimensions on the master mason's template, would be rejected, and the mark upon it would earn its carver nothing. This system, brilliant in its simplicity, created a direct incentive for quality. Every cut had to be precise, every angle true, because a man's livelihood depended on the final tally of his signature in stone. This is our first true handshake with the medieval craftsman. We may not know his name, but we know his mark. We know that the block with 3 parallel lines was shaped by one pair of hands, and the one with the small circle by another. These signatures are a quiet, stubborn form of immortality. They are a worker's way of ensuring that his effort, his skill, and his very presence are recorded not on fragile parchment, but on the enduring fabric of the building itself. And this was only the first layer of a secret code that would grow ever more complex as the great project advanced. A cathedral's worth of stone began a pilgrimage across the land. Its journey was a slow, grinding migration of immense weight, a test of endurance for both man and beast. Without the engine or the crane, this great exodus relied on a brutal, beautiful marriage of raw force and clever mechanics. The first leg of the journey often involved the ox cart, a creaking, groaning contraption pulled by a team of powerful, patient animals. These carts moved at a walking pace, their wide wooden wheels sinking into the mud of unpaved roads after a single rain. A single large block could require a dozen oxen and a specially reinforced cart, turning a trip of just 20 miles into an expedition lasting days. But where the land resisted, water offered a path. Rivers became the medieval equivalent of a superhighway. Blocks were carefully loaded onto wide, flat-bottomed barges, which were then pulled upstream by teams of men or horses walking along the towpaths on the riverbank. This was back-breaking work, but it was exponentially more efficient than dragging the same weight over land. For truly ambitious projects that drew stone from across the sea, the most perilous leg began. Ships known as cogs, with their deep, rounded hulls, were packed with stone ballast. A storm could send an entire shipment, and the crew along with it, to the bottom. The threat of piracy was a constant, shadowy fear, making some shipments of high-quality stone as valuable and as risky as a chest of silver. This is how the distinctive green marble from Sweden traveled along the so-called onion route to grace the altars of grand European cathedrals, and how the dark, polished Purbeck marble was shipped up the English coast to be laid in the floors of Westminster Abbey. Each mile traveled, whether by land or by water, was a financial drain, adding a premium of labor and risk to the very substance of the stone. This perilous journey imbued the material with a sacred value long before a single chisel touched it at the building site. And when it finally arrived, the stone entered a new realm of organized chaos, the sprawling, muddy, and astonishingly busy cathedral workshop. The sprawling cathedral yard was a city within a city, a hive of organized chaos governed by one single, powerful institution, the lodge. This was not merely a workshop, but the very brain and nervous system of the entire project. The lodge was the community of masons itself, bound together by a strict code of conduct and a shared, secret knowledge of geometry and construction. At its head stood the master mason, a figure of immense authority and genius. He was the architect, the structural engineer, and the chief executive officer, all in one. The grand design of the cathedral existed in his mind and was translated onto a large, flat surface of plaster or stone known as the tracing floor. Here, using compasses and straightedges, he would scratch the full-scale, intricate geometrical patterns for every arch, every window, and every sculpted saint. These life-size drawings were the ultimate reference, the master key from which all other templates were derived. When a rough quarry block arrived, it was brought before the master or his senior wardens. They would inspect it, judge its quality and grain, and then assign it its destiny based on the templates. A dense, strong block might be marked for a foundational plinth, while a finer-grained, more workable piece was destined for the delicate foliage of a capital. The lodge operated with an autonomy that was rare for the medieval world. It had its own laws, its own court for settling disputes, and its own paymaster. Masons often lived in lodgings provided by the works, separate from the townspeople, their lives dictated by the rhythm of the construction. This separation was essential for protecting the lodge's most valuable asset, its secrets. The methods for setting out a building, the complex geometry that ensured stability, and the precise proportions that gave a structure its beauty, these were not written in books. They were passed down orally from master to apprentice within the closed and trusted circle of the lodge. For a block of stone, arrival here meant leaving the chaotic world of transport behind and entering a realm of intense, purposeful discipline. Its rough, anonymous existence was over. It was about to be given a specific shape, a precise function, and perhaps a hidden soul. Hidden within the thick walls, never to be seen by human eyes again, the stones shaped by the banker mason formed the cathedral's true skeleton. His workplace was the banker bench, a solid, waist-high table where he spent his days in a private dialogue with stone. His tools were an extension of his will, a collection of chisels and punches for roughing out the shape, and the mason's drag, a long-toothed metal comb that scraped the surface to a final, glassy smoothness. But his true guide was not the tool in his hand, it was the wooden template laid upon the rough block. This template, cut to the exact shape required by the master mason's design, was the law. The banker mason's task was to make the stone perfectly, unerringly match this wooden silhouette. Every aris, the sharp edge where two faces of the stone met, had to be true. Every bed, the surface that would bear the weight of the stone above it, had to be perfectly flat. The immense pressure within a soaring wall or a wide arch meant that a variance of even a single millimeter could cause a fatal point of stress, a crack that would slowly spread like a secret illness through the entire structure. This was a profession built on trust and geometry. The banker mason had to understand how his specific stone, with its unique grain and density, would behave under a load of thousands of pounds for centuries. He was shaping the invisible, building for a future he would never see. And so, the final act of his meticulous labor was deeply personal. After hours of focused work, he would take his point chisel and strike his unique banker's mark into the finished surface. He was signing a document that would be sealed inside the wall, a testament to his skill and his silent contribution to a greater whole. This pride in hidden work created the cathedral's enduring strength. While these anonymous stones locked together to form the bones of the building, a different kind of craftsman was already at work in the sunlit yard, preparing to clothe that skeleton in a skin of breathtaking beauty. The sharp, rhythmic sound of chisels was the constant music of a young apprentice's world. He was the lowest and most essential member of the lodge, a boy of perhaps 12 or 14, bound by a legal contract to a master mason for a period of 7 long years. His life was one of servitude and silent observation. His days began not with a chisel, but with a broom. He was responsible for the countless menial tasks that kept the workshop functioning, from endlessly mixing the lime mortar to fetching water, carrying stones too small for the journeyman, and most importantly, sharpening every blunted tool. This last duty was not a chore, it was a foundational lesson. By spending hours honing the edges of chisels and punches, he learned the feel of different grades of stone, understanding how a fine-grained limestone required a different edge than a tough granite. He learned the language of the lodge not from a book, but by listening to the conversations between the master and the journeyman, absorbing the strange, beautiful terms for every part of the craft. His first attempts at carving were exercises in humility. He would be given a piece of soft, easily worked stone, often a discarded fragment, and a simple template. His task was to carve a basic molding, a simple curve or a hollow, over and over again until his hands could reproduce the shape without conscious thought. The master would inspect these practice pieces, his critical eye noting every wobble in the line, every uneven surface. the apprentice's first real work on the cathedral itself was always assigned to the most inconspicuous places. He might be tasked with carving the plain, functional corbels that would be hidden high up in the roof space, or the simple blocks that would form the inner core of a thick wall, never to be seen again. It was here, on these hidden canvases, that he was allowed to make his first hesitant banker's mark. These early signatures are often heartbreakingly telling. You can sometimes see the uncertainty in the cut, a slight wobble in the line, or a mark that is cut too deep or too shallow. They are frozen moments of a young person's developing skill, a permanent record of a hand learning to trust its own strength and precision. This long, arduous path from apprentice to journeyman, and for a very talented few to master, was the fragile thread upon which the entire art of cathedral building depended. It was a living library of knowledge, passed not through pages, but through the steady guidance of a master's hand on a student's shoulder, ensuring that the secrets of the stone would echo far into the future. But that first, simple signature was only the beginning of the stone's coded life. As the walls began to rise, a new and more intricate language was carved into its surface, a system of assembly marks designed to solve an almost impossible logistical puzzle. Imagine the scene at the cathedral site. Thousands of finished stones, many looking nearly identical to the untrained eye, were piled in the yard. It was utterly impossible for the master mason to simply point and tell the laborers where each one belonged. The solution was a brilliant practical code. After a stone was shaped and marked by its banker mason, another set of symbols was often added. These were not for payment but for placement. They could be a series of simple lines cut into the stone side, a set of Roman numerals, or even a small, carved arrow. Each mark was a precise instruction. A mark might indicate that this stone was the 7th block in the 3rd course of the north wall's 4th pier. Another might show which way was up, or how it locked into its neighbor within a complex arch. This was the medieval equivalent of an IKEA instruction manual, etched directly into the product itself. These marks were the silent conversation between the designers on the tracing floor and the teams of laborers high on the scaffolding, many of whom could not read a written plan. They were the key that allowed a chaotic pile of individual stones to be transformed into a single, soaring, and stable structure. This coded communication was the invisible logic holding the entire ambitious project together. With the skeleton of the building securely locked into place by this system, the true transformation could begin, turning brute strength into breathtaking artistry. The architectural carver's chisel did not just shape stone, it gave it a voice. Where the banker mason's work was hidden, forming the perfect, anonymous blocks of the inner walls, the carver's labor was meant to be seen and felt by all. His workplace was the sunlit yard, and his tools were a more delicate orchestra of clawed chisels for roughing out forms, fine points for detail, and drills for piercing stone to create lace-like effects. His canvas was the building's most public face, the capitals atop columns, the figures crowding the portals, and the fantastic beasts jutting from the gutters. His task was to transform inert rock into a living sermon. A capital could burst into stone foliage, each leaf and vine carved with such botanical accuracy that you could almost see it sway in a breeze that did not exist. In the solemn faces of the saints flanking the main door, he carved a spectrum of human emotion, from serene piety to the terror of the damned. And then there were the gargoyles, those grotesque and often humorous figures. They were not mere decorations, but functional pieces designed to throw rainwater clear of the walls. Yet in their twisted forms and leering faces, they served a second, powerful purpose, a stark, stone reminder of the demons and sins that lurked outside the church-sanctified space. This was public theology, a direct line of communication from a largely illiterate society to the core stories of its faith. Every smiling angel, every grimacing demon, and every narrative scene was a page in a Bible written not on parchment, but in limestone and marble. The carver's genius lay in this duality, making the stone serve both the practical needs of the building and the profound spiritual hunger of the people. His work turned a marvel of engineering into an experience of the divine, a place where stone itself seemed to breathe, judge, and offer grace. Amidst the solemn saints and stern prophets, another face stares out from the stone. He is neither fully man nor plant, but a strange hybrid, his skin erupting into lush foliage, his mouth a fountain of carved vines and oak leaves. This is the Green Man, a silent enigma nestled in the most Christian of spaces. His presence in a cathedral seems at first glance like a paradox. Why would a church, so intent on teaching a new faith, allow such an obviously pagan symbol to take root in its very walls? The truth is far more complex and tells us a great deal about the medieval mind. One compelling theory sees the Green Man as a powerful symbol of rebirth and resurrection, a concept Christianity could eagerly absorb. The lush leaves sprouting from a seemingly lifeless stone face mirrored the promise of eternal life springing from mortal death, a natural metaphor for the core of Christian belief. In this reading, the carvers were not preserving paganism but baptizing it, harnessing the ancient, deep-seated human connection to the cycles of nature and redirecting it toward a new theological truth. Yet there is another, equally plausible story. Many of the stone carvers themselves came from rural communities where older beliefs in forest spirits and the animating force of nature still lingered in living memory. It is possible that these artisans, when given a moment of creative freedom on a boss or a misericord, instinctively carved the familiar faces of the old world into the new. This was not an act of rebellion, but perhaps one of quiet integration, a way of making the immense, intimidating cathedral feel a little more like home, a place where both the new God and the old spirits could somehow coexist. The most haunting interpretation is a strictly Christian one, where the foliate head represents not life, but sin. The leaves spewing from the mouth could symbolize the unchecked growth of wickedness, a visual parable of how corrupt speech and desire can overwhelm a man, turning him into a creature of wild, untamed nature, lost from God's grace. The reality is that the Green Man likely held all these meanings at once, and more. His enduring power lies in this very ambiguity. He is a perfect reminder that the medieval cathedral was not a monolithic fortress of single-minded faith, but a living, breathing cultural tapestry. It absorbed the anxieties, the hopes, and the deep, folk memories of the people who built it and worshipped within it, weaving them all into a stone narrative far richer and more human than any simple doctrine. For centuries, the lodge was a sea of anonymity, its collective will shaping stone into devotion. Then, a quiet revolution began to stir within the cathedral walls. As the Gothic era matured, moving into the 13th and 14th centuries, a new kind of signature started to appear, one not of accounting but of artistry. We can stand before the royal portal of Chartres Cathedral and feel the presence of a unique hand. The serene, elongated figures with their deeply folded drapery possess a cohesive style that sets them apart from the work on other portals, the vision of a singular master guiding a team of carvers. This emergence of the individual is even more dramatic in Germany, with the nameless artist we call the Naumburg Master. His figures of Jutta and Echihard in Naumburg Cathedral are not just symbolic representations, they are startlingly human, with palpable emotions and a psychological depth that feels entirely new. They are portraits in stone capturing a fleeting moment of pride, sorrow, or contemplation that transcends their religious context. This was a profound departure from the medieval norm. The ultimate act of this new self-awareness was the literal signature. In Florence, the painter and sculptor Giotto, overseeing the construction of the city's magnificent bell tower, boldly carved his own name into its marble skin. This was not a hidden banker's mark for a clerk's tally, but a public declaration, Giotto declaring, "I made this." It signaled a seismic shift in the very fabric of society. The value of a work was no longer found solely in its service to God, but also in the genius of the mortal hand that created it. The anonymous craftsman was finally stepping out of the shadow of the lodge, transforming into the figure we recognize today, the artist. That skeletal stone frame was a liberation from the dark, Romanesque churches before it were sanctuaries of solidity, their massive, rounded arches and thick walls creating a powerful, protective atmosphere, but one that felt heavy and earthbound. The Gothic master masons looked at that same material and saw not just weight but potential energy. Their revolutionary system worked like a human skeleton. The pointed arch was its first brilliant adaptation. Unlike a rounded Romanesque arch that pushes outward and downward with a consistent, brute force, the pointed arch is more efficient. It channels its weight more directly downward, requiring less massive wall to contain its thrust. This downward force was then gathered by the rib vault, a network of stone ribs that crossed the ceiling like the graceful bones of a great stone bird. But the true stroke of genius was what happened to all that collected force next. It was gracefully caught and redirected by the flying buttress, those magnificent stone arms that leap from the outside walls to the distant piers. The wall was no longer a load-bearing necessity. It became a curtain, a fragile skin of stone and glass that could be pierced with enormous windows. This is why the great Gothic cathedrals like Chartres or Sainte-Chapelle are filled with such ethereal, colored light. The stone structure was no longer blocking the light, it was framing it, holding it up as the main event. This was the ultimate confidence trick played with stone. The master masons had learned to make it defy its own nature, to appear weightless while carrying unimaginable burdens. They turned the very substance of the earth into a cage for sunlight, creating a new kind of sacred space that reached not just for the heavens but for the light itself. This man held the entire cathedral in his mind. His name was the Master Mason, and he was the closest thing the medieval world had to a chief executive officer of a modern multinational corporation. His responsibilities were staggering. He was not just the architect who conceived the soaring vision. He was the structural engineer who ensured it would not collapse, the project manager who commanded a workforce of hundreds, and the spiritual partner to the clergy who sought to build a new heaven on earth. His first and most sacred tool was the tracing floor. This was a large, level surface, often in a dedicated room within the lodge, covered in plaster or fine stone dust. Here, using a sharp metal point and a set of compasses that were his most prized possessions, he would scratch the full-scale, intricate geometry of the entire building. Every arch, every complex window tracery, and every twisting rib of the vaults was laid out here at its true size. These life-size drawings were the ultimate source code, the master template from which all the wooden patterns for the stone carvers were derived. A single error on this floor would be replicated in 1,000 stones, a mistake that could doom the entire project. Managing the human element was an equal part of his genius. He had to command the labor of quarrymen, carters, bankers, carvers, and unskilled laborers, all while navigating the complex politics and financial pressures from his ecclesiastical patrons. His knowledge was his power, and it was protected with the secrecy of a state secret. The methods for calculating loads, the sacred geometries that ensured harmony and stability, these were not written down. They were whispered from master to chosen apprentice over years of intimate training. Figures like William of Sense, who took control of Canterbury Cathedral after a devastating fire and introduced the new Gothic style to England, became legendary in their own time. Their names were recorded in chronicles because their personal vision, their unique intelligence, literally reshaped the world people saw around them. Every stone that was quarried, shaped, and set into place was fulfilling a destiny that began as a single, perfect line scratched by this one man on a dusty floor. Before the first public stone was set, a profound silence fell over the cleared earth. This was the moment of the foundation stone, a ritual that consecrated the very ground upon which centuries of labor would rise. Bishops in full vestments, local nobles in their finery, and the entire community would gather to witness this sacred act of inception. At the heart of the ceremony was a single, special stone, often carefully hollowed out to create a small chamber. Into this cavity they would place holy relics of a saint, a sealed parchment listing the names of the patrons, and sometimes coins of the realm. This time capsule of faith and community was then lowered into the waiting earth with prayers and hymns, not just set but sealed into the ground. The symbolism was immense and layered. The relics connected the building directly to the spiritual power of the saints, making the site itself a reliquary. The documents and coins rooted the project in its specific time and place, a contract with the present for the future. This single stone became the spiritual anchor for the entire physical mountain of masonry that would follow. It transformed a construction site, a place of mud and noise, into hallowed ground. In the medieval mind, this act did not just mark where a cathedral would be, it established a point where heaven and earth could truly meet, a terrestrial echo of the heavenly Jerusalem. Every stone laid thereafter, from the deepest foundation to the highest spire, was conceptually resting upon this blessed cornerstone. It was a silent prayer made solid, a declaration that this work was for God by the hands of His people. The ambition to build higher and let in more light was a dangerous gamble with gravity itself. For all their genius, the Gothic master masons were navigating uncharted territory, calculating stresses and strains on a scale never before attempted. The stones, pushed to their absolute limit, could sometimes deliver a catastrophic verdict. In the city of Beauvais, they dared to build the tallest choir in all of Europe, a structure that reached for the heavens with an almost reckless faith. For 12 years, it stood as a breathtaking testament to this ambition, its vault seemingly floating at an impossible height. Then, in 1284, the stone skeleton gave way. With a roar that must have sounded like the end of the world, the choir collapsed inward, a mountain of carefully carved ashlar and sculpted saints crashing down in a cloud of dust and shattered dreams. The cause was likely a fatal flaw in the engineering, perhaps insufficient flying buttresses for the unprecedented height, or a weakness in the piers that supported the entire dizzying weight. For the medieval mind, such a disaster was never just a technical failure. It was widely interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure, a punishment for the sin of pride. The collapse sent shockwaves through the continent, a grim warning to every master mason who was drawing his own ever taller plans on the tracing floor. Across the Channel, Ely Cathedral faced its own calamity when its massive central tower fell in 1322. Yet from this rubble arose one of the most brilliant improvisations in architectural history. Instead of rebuilding the square tower, the master mason William Hurley designed the magnificent octagon, a vast wooden-framed lantern that was both structurally sound and flooded the heart of the cathedral with light. It was a triumph born directly from disaster. These catastrophic failures were the most brutal, most expensive teachers imaginable. Each collapse was studied, its lessons absorbed and passed from lodge to lodge. The fallen stones at Beauvais taught future builders how to better distribute weight and reinforce buttressing. The failure at Ely inspired new confidence in combining materials like wood and stone to solve seemingly impossible structural puzzles. Every monument that still stands today does so not just because of its successes, but because it learned from the tragedies of those that fell. Even in the holiest of places, the human spirit refused to be entirely solemn. High above the prayerful silence of the nave, tucked under choir stalls or peering from rainspouts, a secret world of stone laughter thrives. These carvings are the medieval equivalent of a worker's doodle in the margins of a sacred text, a space where the carvers exercised their liberties. A fox dressed as a pious abbot might preach an empty sermon to a captivated flock of plump geese. A miser record, the small shelf on the underside of a folding seat, meant to give a standing monk a slight rest, might be carved with a scene of two battling jesters or a wife clobbering her husband with a frying pan. These images are not random acts of vandalism. They are a sophisticated form of social satire and a psychological release valve. After days spent carving the stern, idealized face of an apostle, a carver's hand might naturally drift toward the comic, the familiar, and the flawed. The depiction of a fox in monk's robes is a sharp, witty critique of clerical hypocrisy, a joke that every peasant and noble alike would instantly understand. A scene of a baker being cheated by a customer poked fun at the daily struggles and deceptions of medieval life. This stone marginalia reveals a faith that was not monolithic or grim, but one that understood the complexities of the human heart. It acknowledged that the path to the divine was walked by very human feet, feet that sometimes stumbled, laughed, and got stuck in the mud. These hidden carvings are a quiet rebellion against perfection, a reminder that the sacred and the profane have always shared the same roof, and that even in the shadow of eternity, someone simply could not resist carving a silly face. The rhythmic sound of chisels did not just fade, it was severed. The great pandemic of the mid-14th century swept across Europe with a speed and ferocity that defied understanding, leaving a third of the population or more dead in its wake. This was not a story confined to fields and towns. It struck directly at the heart of the cathedral workshops. The close-knit lodges where men worked shoulder to shoulder became perfect vectors for the disease. Master masons, skilled carvers, and strong laborers died in staggering numbers, their collective knowledge and strength vanishing in a matter of months. Ambitious projects from Milan to York simply stopped, the stones left half-dressed in the yards, the cranes frozen against the sky like skeletons. For decades, many of these sites lay in a profound silence, a testament to a world that had lost its workforce and its certainty. When the slow, painful recovery finally began and building tentatively resumed, the economic landscape had been turned upside down. The law of supply and demand worked with brutal clarity. With so few craftsmen left alive, their labor became incredibly valuable. A master mason or a skilled carver could now command a wage his grandfather would have thought impossible. This new bargaining power began to erode the old, rigid hierarchy of the lodge. The collective was weakening, and the power of the individual craftsman was rising from the ashes of the plague. You can see this shift subtly inscribed in the stone itself. Look at the windows and spires built after the plague, particularly in the styles known as curvilinear and flamboyant Gothic. Where earlier Gothic was about majestic scale and logical structure, this new work is a frenzy of intricate stone tracery, of flame-like patterns and impossibly delicate detail. It is as if the world, having witnessed such formless horror, was desperately trying to impose a new, complex order onto reality. The stone became a canvas for controlling chaos through sheer ornamental will. This was not just a change in fashion, it was a psychological scar made visible. The pandemic created a great hiatus in the historical record of stone, a gap you can still feel when you stand before a cathedral that took centuries to build. The style below a certain point is one thing, and above it something entirely different, born from a world that had been fundamentally broken and then remade. The Black Death did not just kill people, it murdered an era of innocence and collective ambition. The invisible hand of the plague, having reshaped society, finally left its enduring mark on the very shape of beauty, a permanent and poignant record of collective trauma frozen in limestone and glass. This great wooden engine was the beating heart of the construction site, perched precariously on the rising walls or on towering timber scaffolds. The Treadmill Crane transformed human effort into the raw power needed to defy gravity. Its central mechanism was a massive wooden wheel, wide enough for 1 or 2 men to walk inside it, much like a giant hamster wheel designed for people. As the laborers walked forward, their collective weight and momentum turned the wheel, which wound a thick rope around a central axle. This rope, woven from hemp and as thick as a man's wrist, ran through a system of wooden pulleys, multiplying the force exerted by the men with each pass of the line. The mechanical advantage was astonishing. A small team walking at a steady, plodding pace could hoist a stone block weighing several tons, lifting it from the muddy yard to the dizzying heights of the clerestory wall hundreds of feet above. Every lift was a tense, coordinated ballet. The crane operator, often a senior mason, would stand in a commanding position, his voice cutting through the constant noise of the site. His shouted commands directed the men inside the wheel to start, stop, or adjust their pace with painstaking care. A sudden lurch or a misstep could send a multi-ton stone swinging like a deadly pendulum, threatening to smash against the masonry, snap the rope, or crush the workers below. This was a job that demanded immense trust and perfect timing, where a single mistake could unravel months of work in a single, catastrophic moment. The crane was more than just a machine. It was the essential link, the physical bridge between the earthbound labor of the quarriers and bankers and the skyward vision of the master mason. It was the engine that made the vertical pilgrimage of every single stone possible, turning ambition into architecture one slow, deliberate lift at a time. The grey stone skeleton was never meant to be the final sight. It was merely the armature, the blank page awaiting its glorious illumination. A medieval cathedral's interior was, in its day, an explosion of color so vibrant it would stun our modern senses. Teams of specialized plasterers would first coat the rough stone walls with a smooth layer of lime plaster. This created the perfect, bright white canvas for the armies of painters who followed. They worked with pigments ground from precious minerals and plants, mixed with binders like egg yolk or animal glue. Lapis lazuli, a stone more valuable than gold, was crushed into a brilliant ultramarine blue for the Virgin Mary's robes. Vermilion, derived from toxic mercury sulfide, created the most intense reds for the blood of martyrs and the robes of apostles. Gold leaf, beaten to an impossible thinness, was laid over sticky red clay and polished until it gleamed, capturing and multiplying the light from every candle and window. This was not mere decoration, it was a form of visual theology. The entire space became an immersive Bible. A peasant who could not read a single word of Latin could stand in the nave and understand the entire story of salvation, from the creation in a lush green garden to the Last Judgment painted in terrifying detail over the western door. The colors themselves had meaning. Gold was the light of heaven, blue was the celestial realm, and red was the passion of Christ and the fire of the Holy Spirit. The goal was to overwhelm the visitor, to use sheer sensory splendor to convey a glimpse of the divine glory that awaited the faithful. Today, we see these spaces as monuments of serene gray stone, but that is a historical accident, the result of centuries of wear, puritanical whitewashing, and the slow fading of time. In a few special places, like the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, careful restoration and laser cleaning have stripped away the grime to reveal flashes of that original, shocking polychromy. It allows us to understand that the medieval mind did not see a stark division between the physical and the spiritual. For them, the stone cathedral was a vessel, waiting to be filled with the radiant, painted light of heaven itself. A cathedral's consecration was not an ending, but a new beginning under the relentless hand of time. The stone itself began to keep a slow, geological diary, its pages written by centuries of sun, rain, and frost. This natural weathering is not decay, but a transformation. The sharp, crisp edges carved by a mason's chisel slowly soften, their hard lines becoming gentle curves. Delicate facial features on a saintly statue blur, as if receding into a gentle mist. Rain, slightly acidic from the atmosphere, etches minute channels into the stone, while frost expands in tiny cracks each winter, slowly exfoliating the surface grain by grain. This process creates a beautiful, living skin on the building, a natural archive of every storm it has endured and every summer of sun it has absorbed. It is the stone's way of settling into the landscape, of becoming one with the passage of the years. Yet the marks left by nature are often gentle compared to the violent scars inflicted by human hands. The religious upheavals of the Reformation unleashed waves of iconoclasm, a fervent belief that religious imagery was idolatrous. Mobs and sanctioned groups alike stormed into churches, armed with hammers and chisels. They did not merely topple statues, they systematically defaced them, knocking the heads off saints, scratching out the eyes of carved angels, and smashing the delicate limbs of prophets. A cathedral portal, once a coherent stone Bible, became a gallery of mutilated figures, a permanent record of theological fury. Centuries later, modern warfare added its own brutal chapters. Artillery shells and bombs tore through vaults and walls, leaving gaping wounds open to the sky. The skeletal remains of a bombed-out cloister or a collapsed nave stand as stark, silent memorials to the destructive power of human conflict. These are not natural scars, they are violent interruptions, moments of chaos frozen in the fractured stone. In response to this accumulated damage, a new movement arose in the 19th century, led by passionate and often controversial figures like Eugène Viollet-le-Duc in France. This was the age of restoration, a mission to save these crumbling monuments. Viollet-le-Duc's philosophy was not simply to repair, but to complete the building as he believed its original medieval architects had intended. He rebuilt the spire at Notre Dame de Paris, a structure that had been lost for centuries, and he replaced defaced statues with his own idealized versions of medieval art. His work was brilliant, but it was also a form of creative interpretation. He was not just restoring a building, he was reimagining it, leaving a powerful 19th century signature upon the medieval fabric. This is the final layer of the stone story. Every chip from a reformer's hammer, every shrapnel scar, and every carefully tooled replacement block from a Victorian workshop is a later chapter in an ongoing biography. The cathedral is a palimpsest, a document where the original text has been written over again and again by the hands of time, conflict, and renewal. That ancient dialogue between mallet and chisel never truly fell silent. Today, in the shadow of the very cathedrals their predecessors built, a small guild of modern stonemasons keeps the old craft vibrantly alive. Their workshop is often the cathedral yard itself, and their primary mission is one of perpetual care, an endless conversation with the stones of the past. They stand as the living link in an unbroken chain of knowledge, their hands possessing the same intimate understanding of a stone's hidden grain and its secret fracture points. Their toolboxes are a fascinating blend of centuries. You will still find the classic orchestra of steel, the same chisels, punches, and mason's drags that have been used for 1,000 years. But these now sit beside diamond-tipped saws that slice through granite with a whirring precision, and laptops displaying three-dimensional scans of a crumbling statue. This marriage of old and new is essential. Before a single new stone is cut, lasers might map every undulation of a damaged wall, and computer models can calculate the precise stress a new replacement block must bear. But the final act, the moment of truth, always returns to the human hand guided by an ancient tactile wisdom. The modern mason's greatest challenge is one of interpretation and humility. When a medieval corbel is too weathered to save or a gargoyle has lost its head to pollution, they must carve a new one. This is not mere replication, it is a deep form of empathy. The mason must study the surrounding original work, feel the style of the long-dead carver, and understand the tool marks they left behind. The goal is not to create a perfect, sterile new piece, but to carve a replacement that honors the original spirit, that carries the same energy and intention, so it can sit beside its 800-year-old neighbor without seeming like an imposter. Their work ensures the cathedrals are not frozen museums, but living, breathing entities that continue to grow and change, even as they are preserved. In the careful strike of their mallet, the journey of the stone continues, and the sacred narratives etched into these monuments are guaranteed a voice for generations yet to come. The stones have always held their secrets, but now we have the tools to hear them speak. Modern archaeology acts as a master key, unlocking the silent language carved into the masonry. It begins with the most fundamental act of looking, a systematic and painstaking process of mapping and cataloging every single banker's mark on a wall or pier. When archaeologists plot these symbols onto a digital map, hidden patterns begin to emerge. A cluster of identical marks high on the north transept, for example, might represent the work of a single team of masons who were assigned that specific section. A sudden shift in the style or type of mark at a certain height can reveal a clear construction phase, perhaps a pause in work for a generation before a new master mason took over with a fresh crew. The very sequence of the marks tells a story, showing us the order in which the walls were literally pieced together, stone by logical stone. To understand the stone's epic journey, we turn to petrological analysis. This is the science of reading a rock's geological passport. By taking a thin slice of a stone and examining it under a microscope, geologists can identify its unique mineral composition and texture. They can then match this fingerprint to a specific quarry bed, sometimes with astonishing precision. A block of limestone in an English cathedral might be definitively traced back to the quarries of Keene in Normandy, providing concrete evidence of a bustling cross-channel trade route that operated centuries ago. This turns abstract historical records of stone purchases into a tangible, physical reality. The latest revolution comes from laser scanning and photogrammetry. These technologies allow us to capture the entire building in a cloud of millions of precise data points, creating a perfect digital twin. This digital model can be manipulated in ways the physical building cannot. We can virtually peel back layers, measure deformations to the millimeter, and even simulate the stresses of 800 years of gravity and wind. Most remarkably, we can alter the virtual lighting, casting raking light across a carved surface from angles the sun never reaches. This often reveals the faint, ghostly traces of tool marks, or the subtle guidelines scratched by the master mason that have been all but erased by time, details completely invisible to the naked eye. Each of these advances, from the simple plotted map to the complex digital scan, gives us a new lens. We are no longer just admiring a monument, we are conducting a forensic examination of its life. The methods of the medieval builders, the economic networks that supplied them, and the individual hands that shaped our history are finally stepping out of the shadows, their full story told by the very stones they set in place. This collective biography, written in stone, forces us to reconsider our own sense of time. We live in an era of quarterly reports and instant gratification, but the medieval world operated on a generational clock. A master mason would dedicate his entire life to a project, fully aware that the soaring spire he envisioned would only be completed by his successors, perhaps by a boy who was just an apprentice learning to hold a chisel. The grandfather who hauled the foundation stones from the quarry knew his grandson would be an old man when the final glass was set in the great west window. This was not a source of frustration but a profound act of faith. It was a tangible declaration that their community, their faith, and their shared purpose were bigger than any single lifetime. This long-term investment was underpinned by a revolutionary idea that faith and science were not enemies but two sides of the same sacred coin. For the master mason, geometry was not just a practical tool, it was a divine language. He believed that God had constructed the universe according to perfect mathematical principles. Therefore, by using the compass and the straightedge to create a building of perfect proportions, he was not merely engineering a stable structure, he was replicating the very mind of the Creator. The cathedral was his prayer, written in the flawless logic of angles and arcs. Every mark we find is a signature of this immense human endeavor. The quarryman's rough chip is a testament to anonymous, back-breaking labor. The banker mason's precise symbol is a record of quiet, hidden skill. The carver's laughing gargoyle or serene saint is a burst of individual personality within the grand collective scheme. Together, they form a chorus of voices from across the centuries. They did not build for fame, but for a future they would never see. The stone is their vessel, carrying their hope, their devotion, and their sheer, stubborn humanity forward through time. It is a frozen moment of aspiration, asking us what we, in our own time, are building for the generations who will follow. From its dark quarry bed to its final rest in a sunlit vault, the journey of a single stone is a profound human epic. This is not merely a story of architecture, but a biography carved by the calloused hands of quarrymen, the precise tools of the bankers, and the inspired chisels of the carvers. It is a narrative etched in enduring rock, a chronicle of collective faith, breathtaking ambition, catastrophic failure, and hard-won triumph. These cathedrals do not stand as mute monuments of a forgotten age. They are vibrant, living archives. Their very surfaces are inscribed with the personal hopes, deep-seated fears, and the vibrant personalities of the thousands of people who built them. The next time you find yourself standing before one of these immense structures, do not just look at the grand spectacle, lean in closer, look at the stone itself. Find the small, sharp cut of a banker's mark, hidden for centuries. Trace the soft, weathered features of a saint and the comic grin of a gargoyle peeking from a gutter. If you look closely enough and listen with more than your ears, you will begin to hear it. You will hear the echoes of an incredible journey, a timeless whisper from the people who left their marks along the way. They invite us to remember their world, to feel the weight of their devotion, and in doing so, to reflect upon the legacy we ourselves are building for the generations yet